steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict. Thanks for coming back and checking out the channel. I really appreciate it. What I want to do today is take a look at a 1964 Lincoln Continental sedan that recently sold on Bring a Trailer and talk about why it went for considerably less than what we've seen other 64 sedans go for. All right, this car that you see on the screen was a car that I wasn't able to do a listing review on. Again, I've just had a bunch of things going on here trying to finish up a project, but this car sold about a month ago on May 16th of 2025. You could see there $24,250. This 64 sedan is a car that I think overall someone got a pretty good deal on, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, I do want to contrast it with a car that sold on 4/29/2025, which was just a couple of weeks before that sale. And this car sold for $52,500. So why is there a difference of 25K or so? So we'll jump into that now. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing that. I appreciate it. It's free, all of this content that I share. And again, I certainly appreciate it. If we scroll down here to the main information that Bring a Trailer does a great job on, we know this car has the rose paint. I'm a big fan of this color. It's one you don't see a lot, but it also has the rose beige leather interior. Based upon the Destination Sales Office, or the DSO, or Destination Sales, basically the district, this was a Chicago, Illinois car, which we realized could be of concern if this car was driven a lot in harsh conditions. When we take a look at the car, again, we can see for the most part, as I scroll through these photos, you basically have a car that, from what we can tell, doesn't really have any significant damage in terms of the bumpers or the body panels. Everything appears to be there. It has the rare trailer hitch option, which, yes, was an option on these cars. Folks did tow small boats as well as campers with these cars in that era, and you'll still occasionally see those from time to time. This car, I think the best way to sum it up is it's a good survivor car. And what I mean by that is I often talk about the fact that I like a car that's kind of been untouched, so to speak. Now, a few things have been done on this car, but if you look at the overall look of it, and I do apologize, these photos are loading a little slow. I think it's my internet connection today. What you'll see is basically what I call a survivor car, a car that hasn't really been touched too much. It hasn't been resto modded, so to speak, and everything is pretty much there. If we take a look at the interior, we can see the seat is well worn. If we look at the floorboard from here and we look at the actual carpet, we can see it does appear that it has the factory heel pad in. So that's given us a little indication that more than likely the carpet has never been changed. And being that this was a Midwest Chicago car, that is, kind of good, I think, in the grand scheme of things, because wow, if this car had been driven in some harsh conditions and things like that, the carpet may be a lot worse. And that would be an indication that there could be rust challenges underneath the carpet. Now, I know I'm kind of bouncing around the photos here a little bit. And again, my apologies for the internet connection, but what we could see on the interior is a beautiful interior. We can see that it has the speed control, and that's really the main option other than the optional air conditioning from what we can see here. Everything does appear to be there. One item that's often missing is this little ring, if you will, that says ignition. It's hard to tell if it's here in this photo, but that's often missing around where the key goes into the ignition. We can see that it has I'd say pretty rare, this was an option, I believe, beginning in 64. This was a trunk release. So because it's not a convertible, you would be able to open the glove box, kind of lean over, or the passenger would be able to open the glove box and pop this, and that was a vacuum release for the trunk. We could see in the trunk itself, speaking of the trunk, all of the interior is there. So we'll take a second for this to load. We could see that shelf above, that is where the spare tire goes. and it is there, which is fantastic. And then often on top is what we refer to as the toilet seat, if you will, because it kind of flaps open. That's how you're able to kind of get in there and allow for the tire to be removed based upon how it's mounted in there, if you will. From an engine bay perspective, this is what we would expect more on a Survivor car. We can see it's the MEL 430, which is very standard. We can also see it has the single pot reservoir. I know other folks have mentioned this prior, but if you look at the speed control that I had mentioned, that is mounted here. I know some folks have said, hey, for the most part, you can't fit a dual master cylinder with the speed control. I've seen it done, and it's not as common, but I would say that I have seen it done, and if the speed control wasn't working, that would potentially be an option for somebody to go, "Hey, I wanna go ahead and just upgrade it, I could remove the speed control." But the speed control being an optional accessory, it's a little bit more rare in the grand scheme of things. We could see, and we will see this in the paperwork, that this manifold was replaced, and that was purchased from Lincoln Land, which is about 30-45 minutes from where I live here in Florida. We can see a few things here, including this often here is often replaced. These will kind of rot out, this little union, if you will. We can see it does not have the battery. The battery tray is there, but there's a box that goes around it. And those boxes, from what I've seen, are pretty rare. A lot of folks discard them. It's not necessarily a necessity, but it's just worth pointing out there. From everything else, we can see it looks like it has new, probably plugs and wires, I would assume. We can see kind of the normal dinginess, is what I would call it, of a car that's more of a Survivor car, and I'm perfectly fine with that, because at the end of the day, that could all be cleaned up if that's something that you so wish to do. We can see it does have new cables. The person did put two red cables that would possibly confuse some folks, but certainly typically the negative is going to be a black and the positive is going to be a ground, or the positive is going to be the positive, the red, if you will. We can also see a sticker here. The battery was replaced March of 2023. In Florida, I tell you, 3 to 5 years is kind of the battery life if the car is driven a decent amount and kind of in the harsher, warmer climates. But that's just something to kind of keep in mind there. We can see it does have the fan shroud. This is an aftermarket fan of some sort. And I've seen this before, and I don't know if this is the same car in the past that I maybe have looked at, but we could see it does not have a clutch fan. So that would be something that I would replace, because this is an air conditioned car. It would have had an extra blade on the factory fan, and it, of course, would have had a clutch as well. So that could easily be replaced. But the key thing is the fan shroud is here. In 64, they are metal, and that's a solid thing. We can see the air condition compressor there as well. Factory AC, it was not 100% on every car. It was actually an option, about $500 to $600, but this car does have it. Lastly, we'll take a look at the undercarriage of this car, and then we'll talk about some of the things that could have driven the price higher. When we look under the car, my first thought would be, wow, if this is a Chicago car, I really want to spend some time looking at all of these photos to make sure that is not a rust bucket underneath. We could see there are some minor areas here that potentially would indicate rust, but this could easily be surface rust. This main kind of structural item here in the very far back of the car looks very solid. Here we're looking at the passenger side, and it looks solid. Here we're looking at the rocker area, and it looks solid. You've got a little bit of discoloration. This isn't anything to be too concerned about it as far as my opinion goes. And then the floorboards. These look really, really good. And this is what you'll typically see underneath these cars. The car that I own, my 64 convertible, came from just north of this area, and it had all of the similar grittiness, if you will, as it relates to kind of how all the fuel lines look and how the floorboards look. That's typically the discoloration that you're going to see. We can see all of the clips here that they're in line for, that retain the fuel lines there. We see a little bit of discoloration underneath in this area, but as far as what I can tell here, it doesn't look anything too concerning. This looks better than a lot of the cars that I've seen. We do see the exhaust is going to more than likely need to be replaced, and we can see right here above where the transmission is at. This all looks solid, which is great news. In this area, this is the driver's side. You can see there's a little bit of a hole right here in this area, and this is a very solid piece right here. Now, granted, this does appear to be a hole. It's not the end of the world. I think this could easily be repaired if that's all the rust was, unless that's like a paint splotch, which I do not assume that it is. But I would want to check to make sure all of this is solid. It certainly looks to be that way, which is good. There's some detail photos here of the front, and we can see this little splash guard is in there. That's sometimes removed depending on the work that folks have done on these cars in the past. I would want to look underneath the battery compartment to see, make sure that there's no rust here, and it looks very, very solid from what I can see. Just kind of further going through a few of these photos, I've seen these cars look a lot more oily, a lot more wet from leaks and things such as that. This car certainly doesn't look as bad as some of the other ones, as I mentioned, that I've seen before. The exhaust certainly is going to need to be replaced. It's hard to tell if this is an original exhaust. I could tell you on my 64, it certainly was original or swapped, several years after 64, because mine looked probably is about as bad as this exhaust. The good news is most exhaust shops can handle that, whether it's going to be a custom exhaust. There are a few vendors like Devious Customs that sell a full exhaust system. There's two mufflers, there's two resonators. That's where you see here, and then back in the back here. So there are technically four. That's one of the reasons why these cars are very, very quiet. Now, if you're still with me, thank you. Go ahead and continue watching here. What I'm going to do is talk about some of the key things that would have driven the price potentially higher. Again, about 25,000. I don't think that's a bad price for what the folks are getting. I do believe this seller had commented in the comments, which is always a key thing to take a look at, especially if you're bidding on one of these cars via Bring a Trailer. I believe he referenced that, hey, wow, we're in a territory where I have more in this car than what it's going to sell for potentially. It's hard to say how accurate that would be because we don't know what he paid for it. But 10 and 15 years ago, even further back, I mean, you could get a nice sedan like this for 5, 6, 7, 8 grand, depending on the condition. Of course, a nicer car is going to drive a higher price. But let's take a look at some of the things that, let's say this was a car that you were looking to buy, or often in the future, folks go, hey, I want to buy one of these cars. What do I need to look for? Let's talk about some of the things that are going to have to be done more than likely to bring this car up to a nicer condition. All right. So first and foremost, if we look at this other car again that sold a couple of weeks prior, I'm not going to go through all through it. This is not a factory black car, but what this other car that sold for double the amount basically had that this other car that we're looking at did not is a reupholstered interior, newer or nicer exhaust, if you will. They also had basically a repaint, a whole complete color change on the car. And I know some people would go, well, that's not my cup of tea. I want something more original. Hey, I'm with you. I would go after the $25,000 car all day. But just to kind of compare, this is what this $52,000 car looked like. Okay. And you go, wow, that doesn't look original and stuff. Absolutely. It looks original here. But of course, what they change it to is something that drove the price, right? You have a full repaint of the car. You have a black color, which is typically going to love it or hate it, drive a higher price. Reupholstered interior. If you don't believe me, depending on where you live, let's say in the US, go and ask a local interior shop, hey, I'm looking at buying a 64 Lincoln sedan or convertible. What would you charge to reupholster the interior? You'd be amazed at what the prices are. If you go for a Jim Wallace kit, he's north of us here in the Tampa Bay area, up in the Ocala, greater Ocala area. I think technically Webster, but Jim Wallace, those kits can easily be 5 grand just for the upholstery kit. That doesn't even include the installation, right? And then, oh, by the way, go and ask someone, a local paint shop that's reputable, hey, how much to do a full repaint on a car or to basically do a respray, right? Whether you detrim the entire car and you do all of that. I mean, you would be amazed easily at a 10, 15, 20, $30,000 paint job. Insane, right? That's just where prices have went. Now we all know the old, saying, hey, I got a buddy that can do it cheaper. Absolutely. If you can do the stuff your own on your own, and things like that, you can certainly save a lot of money, but that's not what I'm talking about. Typically those buddy deals don't always go well, if that makes sense. The a few things that I would reinforce on this car, right? What we don't know is based upon the receipts, we know that they changed the manifold, they changed a couple of things, and that's fantastic, right? These manifolds, they tend to crack and or leak, and they cause like a ticking noise. And because these cars are pretty quiet, that's very annoying to someone that wants to get out and enjoy the car. But when you think about some of the other things that I've covered on older videos, and I've talked about, you got to change the timing gear setup on it, right? If you're gonna eventually have your water pump rebuilt, you're gonna want to take out the mini thermostats. If you are going to, take the water pump off and have it rebuilt, you're gonna want to probably dig in and do a few other things. Wow, while you're there, why not go ahead and change the oil pan gasket, right? At that point, if you're doing that, maybe, and you're going to jack the engine up just a hair to get to it, why not go ahead and change the motor mounts? They're fairly reasonable on getting those revulcanized, or buying an NOS set to swap those out. 60 plus years of this heavy MEL 430 engine with the oil and grease and grime, it tends to compact and compress those factory motor mounts, if you will. The interior is one of those things, you may live with it. I love the interior color. I like the originality of it. One thing that drives me a little bit crazy is the factor, or the seat. You could tell it's well worn. You could probably take it to an upholstery shop if you said, "Hey, look, I want to just maintain this interior. Can you add some padding? Can you clean it up?" There's all kinds of different methods that folks will use to fill in those cracks and things like that. That would be uh a way to not spend as much money on an interior like this. The door panels look fantastic. I think the seats, what you'll tend to learn on these cars is, over the course of time, if those seats aren't conditioned a lot, they will tend to crack, and they'll get to a point where, most folks will just say, "Hey, I just want to go ahead and get them redone." In addition, I've talked about in 64 and 65. This is something that all of the Lincoln folks, from Chris Dunn and Lincoln Land to John Cashman to Blair and Teresa, will tell you, you have to rebuild or bypass the amp gauge. So the amp gauge is up here on the dash, of course, and if it hasn't been done, you're going to want to do that. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. When I look at some of these, pot metal pieces and whatnot, I look at, a lot of that and say, "Hey, a lot of that could be cleaned up." I'm not one to take a car like this, or want to blow it all apart and get everything re-chromed. That would spend, you'd spend a lot of money. Not everybody re-chromes pot metal. And again, not everything on this car is pot metal, but some of the pieces, as I mentioned here, these I believe are actually made of pot metal. It's a little bit different metal, and it's not as nice of a metal, if you will, as like a bumper, if that makes sense. But those are some of the things that you would want to keep in mind. So, from a purist perspective, you would probably have somebody go, "Hey, I want to redo the interior." You're probably going to have someone go, "Hey, I want to go ahead and, at least if nothing else, do another single reservoir on the brake system. If not, upgrade to the dual." And again, I realize most people will say they haven't seen it. It hasn't been done. You can't do it with the speed control. Certainly, I have seen it done. I wasn't able to find a photo of it, unfortunately. But, and again, if the speed control is not working, that would be something that you may go, "Hey, I want to leave it in the dash," of course, because that hole is cut out there. It looks cool. If you're not going to ever use it, or it doesn't work, you could always have someone slightly move it in the engine bay there if need be. So there's just some things to think about. When I think of the trunk itself, it looks really, really good. You could probably clean it up, steam clean it a little bit. The engine bay could certainly be cleaned up if that's something that you want to kind of get into. The interior, I think, is the big thing. You're going to have somebody go, "Hey, do I want to swap the interior? Do I want to go with a new Jim Wallace kit?" And that type of thing. But at $25,000, the other big thing that you have to think about is underneath the car. And you go, "Well, what are we talking about here?" If nothing else, the exhaust is going to have to be redone. Nobody wants to drive down the road in these beautiful cars and have a loud exhaust leak or noise underneath. And certainly with the hole that we saw in the muffler resonator areas, you would want to have that swapped out. You can look on deviouscustoms.com. You're probably looking at upwards of 1,500, 2,000-ish, I believe, for a kit. I think there's a couple of vendors, including Devious Customs. And you could also go to your local muffler shop and go, hey, from the front all the way to the back, we want to do something new, stainless, if you will. That way it won't rust out. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind. When you add all of those things in, if you're fine with the paint, and you want to clean up the paint and you want to clean up the existing chrome, then you kind of add all that stuff together and go, hey, okay, exhaust, interior, redoing some of these things, the timing gear. I think I mentioned that the timing gear has to be redone in these cars. If you're going to get into doing that and whatnot, and that's what could easily bring you to a 30, 40, $50,000 car. Now, it's not saying that everybody needs to do all of these things to sell their car, but certainly those items are going to help drive a higher price. If you're fortunate and you have a lower price point that you can get in at a 25,000, that's a good thing because you can get in with that car. It starts, it drives, the windows work. I didn't mention that. Of course, there's a video there that showcases that. You could kind of immediately begin to enjoy it. And then when you buy a car at that price point, at a lower price point, if you will, then you can begin plotting immediately on what you want to do. How crazy do you want to go with it? Now, dare I say, Resto Mod, certainly whoever bought this car, that's always an opportunity as well. I love the custom Lincolns. I love the factory Lincolns. I love the authenticity and kind of OG status of this car for the most part. So those are a few things to keep in mind. If you like what we're doing here, please leave a comment. You can also leave a tip here if you want, or you can become a member. I'm going to have more content coming for members only. Stay on the rise and check out the Addict podcast. Some of the recent episodes are here in full video or however you find podcasts. ODB, the Lincoln Addict. Take care, everyone. Let me know what you think. Peace.
Welcome to LA where the players play, and we ride on them things like every day.